What's up guys, I'm Hellblazer. Today I'm going to be talking about Spider-Man. Again, sorry if the name choice threw you off, but just recently I changed my name from King Bishop to Hellblazer because, long story short, I was thinking of some new themes for this channel and right off the bat, Hellblazer came to mind, which sounds completely perfect for, this new theme I'm going for, which is Hellish theme. And I'm sorry if this goes against whatever brand I originally started, but it's what I want to do, and so I'm going for it. So no harassment in the comments below, alright? Comprende? Are we up to speed now? Alright, let's move on. Alright, so today I want to talk about Spider-Man. More specifically, Spider-Man PS4 and what I think made it so special. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about my history with Spider-Man and where I stand on the matter. Because there's a lot I have to say in regards to the character overall. Many years ago, I used to be a Marvel fanboy. That was until I later realized that the only reason why I liked Marvel at all was really because of Spider-Man. I mean, don't get me wrong, Marvel has some other characters that are really cool that I like a lot, such as Ghost Rider, Iron Fist, Daredevil. They're all really cool, I like them a lot. But before I've even gotten to know anything about those characters, I originally knew more about Spider-Man. And that is because during the early days, I had watched the 90s Spider-Man animated series over 50 times. It wasn't just the best adaptation of Spider-Man, but it was usually the only one that was more faithful to the character. That changed with the Sam Raimi movies and the spectacular Spider-Man animated series. Alright, now onto the main topic. As for the Spider-Man video games, I wasn't really all that much of a fan of them, at least most of them. And that is because to me, most of them have had bad animation and strange character designs that I don't agree with. Of course, I am aware that back in the early to mid 2000s, there was hardly a such thing as perfect animation when it came to video games. But that's always been my number one expectation out of a good Spider-Man game, is to not only enjoy the game itself, but the look of it as well. And no Spider-Man game has ever really fulfilled that slot for me. Except Shattered Dimensions. Shattered Dimensions is probably the only one I'll say has redeeming quality for me. However, that's not really the topic of this video. We're talking about Spider-Man PS4, and I must say, Spider-Man PS4 is not only one of the best video games that Insomniac has produced thus far, but to me, it's also one of the best adaptations of Spider-Man. Insomniac did an outstanding job in having Spider-Man appeal to more than just the casual fans by including awesome references, Easter eggs, and other suits from many different adaptations. They also handled Miles Morales' character very well to the point where he is now more likable than ever. Insomniac knows as well as comic book fans know that Peter Parker isn't the only Spider-Man that exists in the Marvel Universe. And that the idea of Spider-Man in general is that getting bitten by a radioactive spider is an accident that could really happen to anyone. I've already said this many times before, but allow me to make this as crystal clear as possible. Whether people want to admit it or not, Miles Morales does have the potential to be as great a Spider-Man as Peter Parker. I say this because in spite of being written poorly in Marvel Comics under Brian Michael Bendis, Miles Morales has always had some unique qualities about his character that both fascinates and interests me, such as his powers, the friendly dynamic between him and Genki Lee, and the relationship between his parents and his Uncle Aaron, aka the Prowler, a hero in his own right. One thing that really annoys me about the Spider-Man fanbase is when people say that just because Peter Parker is a great character that automatically makes him irreplaceable compared to Miles. That kind of logic really annoys me because I am of the opinion that diverse characters could fulfill the role of an original character if written really well, if not better. However, I've never really seen Miles Morales as a replacement of Peter Parker, but rather an enhancement of Peter Parker. And for anyone asking, yes, I have played Spider-Man PS5, and it is ultimately amazing. It's not only the best version of Miles Morales right next to Spider-Verse, but to me, it's also a better written MCU Spider-Man movie. Because while the Peter Parker character is great, one thing that I think is important to the overall structure of the character is growth. And I honestly do feel as though we haven't really gotten much of that out of Peter as of late. As much as I truly admire the character of Peter Parker a lot, I really do feel like there needs to be some contrast between him and Miles Morales. Because when you think about it, if we just kept on going the status quo route with Peter Parker, then the character will just get more and more boring as time moves on. and Miles Morales will just overshadow Peter as time moves on. And I find it funny how people fanboy the shit out of MCU Peter and say that he is the most comic accurate Spider-Man, when really, most of his character development is directly pulled from Brian Michael Bendis' take on Miles Morales. At this point, Marvel really doesn't need to make Peter Parker a teenager again, because as Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man PS5 proved, you could just have Miles Morales fulfill the role of teenage Spidey, and you never have to dumb down or change anything about Peter's character in order to make Spider-Man relevant. It would have made more sense if Miles was the one struggling to find his path in the MCU as an iconic hero, and Peter being right by his side as kind of like his Uncle Ben / mentor figure. That to me is a lot more impactful than just seeing teenage Peter Parker all over again, with him essentially being Iron Man 2.0 or all new, all different Spider-Man from 2015. And I've seen some people in the past make the assumption that the reason why Marvel Studios decided to give Peter Parker the MCU spotlight instead of Miles Morales is because of public perception of the character and Marvel's back and forth business with Sony. To which I call utter bullcrap on, because I think that the multiverse concept really does work well for Spider-Man, and definitely needs more recognition on screen. Marvel just needs to get real Spider-Man fans on board to write the character in a more spectacular fashion, as opposed to just making him out to be what's essentially Miles Morales in an Iron Man suit. The fact that this concept is so overlooked live-action wise by Sony and Marvel is really upsetting to me. And yeah, I know that the MCU is going to be having their own Spider-Verse with Spider-Man 3, but based on the concept art, I can already tell that it's not going to have nearly the same impact as Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse or the video games. But we'll see how that all plays out. Say what you want about Miles Morales as a character, but I honestly feel as though Marvel needs to stop milking the shit out of teenage Peter Parker. Which brings me over to the biggest example of what made Spider-Man PS4 so special to me. The direction of Peter Parker. I love that Insomniac had chosen to make Peter Parker an adult superhero again, because one thing that's always annoyed me so much about the MCU Spider-Man movies was them not having Peter Parker be mature or smart enough to handle every single obstacle or task that gets thrown his way responsibly. Sure, he has the courage to want to defeat Vulture and the bad guys on his own, but all of that courage gets bogged down by the reliance of Stark Tech. And I know it's because Marvel wanted this Spider-Man to be different from anything previously done by Sony. I get that. But the problem with this new take on Spider-Man is that it seems to misconstrue or make fun of some of the most important aspects of Spider-Man's character that a lot of people, including myself, respect a lot. Peter Parker in Captain America Civil War tells Tony Stark that he wants to look out for the little guy. But in Homecoming, he makes a lot of mistakes and doesn't seem to get punished for them at all, nor ever seems to learn from them. Peter Parker in Homecoming, as well as the rest of the MCU, isn't really given much of a clear motivation of being a superhero. Instead, he's just played up for fun and laughs, which is not really what Spider-Man is all about. Literally, the only interesting thing about Homecoming is Peter taking down the Vulture on his own with his own suit. But even that's not properly constructed, as the movie pretty much tells us later on, fuck Spider-Man going his own way, let's just rely more on the Stark brand by having Peter receive more and more and more fancy suits in every single movie because it's fun, right? And in addition to that, Far From Home shits on the idea of Spider-Man going his own way even more by having Peter Parker use Stark Tech to make his own suit. And you know, I've heard people point out countless times that Peter Parker having organic webs in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies is a dumb concept. My response to that is no. Peter relying on Stark Tech to fight his battles for him instead of fighting them on his own merits the way he should be, and on top of that, not really having the brain smarts, the maturity to be able to see right through Tony and notice all the flaws in his character. That is a dumb concept, because not only does it nullify the idea of Spider-Man actually being an independent superhero, but it also nullifies Peter Parker's character as a whole. At least in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, we actually get to see Peter Parker go through real challenges, real relatable problems that are easy to catch on, and that actually matter. Whereas the MCU Spider-Man movies, however, seem to focus more on the small aspects of Peter's character. Also, let's not forget that the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies actually explains how Peter Parker makes his own Spidey suit. Much like Leon Ditko's version of Spidey from the 616 Marvel comics, Peter Parker in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies is always thinking about Mary Jane, who has blue eyes and red hair. We've gotten none of that in the MCU Spider-Man movies, or in the Amazing Spider-Man movies for that matter. And I'm really mixed on the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I don't completely hate them, but I also don't completely love them. They are just alright movies in my opinion. Of course, anyone who knows me knows that I like to be really reasonable about the stuff I like and don't like. And I honestly don't like the Amazing Spider-Man movies very much, just because I feel like they are too drawn out, overly complicated, and are just too in line with the Ultimate Comics. And as far as I know, the Ultimate series of Marvel Comics is pretty controversial. Not everyone is a fan of it. Because much like the DCEU, it fundamentally challenges a lot of things about the mainstream continuity. And quite honestly, it feels like Marvel is trying to do exactly that same thing with Peter Parker in the MCU Spider-Man movies. By not only trying to make him more funnier, but also trying to make him more younger and stupider than Earth 616 Peter. And before anyone lumps me in with that group of people who just wanted to hate on MCU Spider-Man, understand that I really wanted to like MCU Spider-Man a lot. I really did. But the thing is, I grew up with Leon Ditko's version of Spider-Man more so than I ever did with Bendis and Pacelli's version of Spider-Man, which is clearly MCU Peter before MCU Peter, don't at me. I grew up knowing Spider-Man best as a young, independent, reluctant superhero. And so because of that, it's pretty hard for me to accept a version of Spider-Man that feels like the complete opposite of that on screen. And I've actually had some people tell me that they think that MCU Spider-Man is just as great as mainstream Spidey. To which I say,
well, to each his own.
But I stand by everything that I said. And I know all of what I said so far probably sounds like verbatim, like it's already been said before, but that's honestly how I feel about this. You can try and argue that this is a really fun, unique depiction of Spider-Man, but honestly to me, it's nothing but a huge slap in the face of what came before. And that's not me being mean or insensitive, that's me being real with you guys, 100% honest, and sharing with you what my hot takes are on certain topics. And you're going to be seeing a lot more of that on this channel, hence the name Hellblazer. But look, I'm not saying that you can't ever go the unique route with Spider-Man. You can make Spider-Man unique. But what makes him unique isn't the suit itself. The man underneath the suit is. And Spider-Man as a concept is still able to be interesting regardless of whoever wears the mask. Whether it be a black kid from Brooklyn, a time traveler, a vigilante, a clone, or hell, even a blonde rock star chick. The character of Spider-Man is defined by one's eternal conflict. And Insomniac handles this basic fundamental of Spider-Man way better in my opinion. With not just Peter Parker, but with Mary Jane, Gloria, Miles Morales, and every other character in the game. I will agree that the story isn't really 100% solid. I think that for the moments where this game focuses on the obscurity of Spider-Man's rogues gallery, they really could have had that guy who was dressed up as Spider-Man actually be the chameleon. Instead of it all just being a mission to help out a civilian, it really could have been a mission to take down another one of Spider-Man's most obscure villains. That would have been really cool, and would have really solidified the idea of the city never sleeping. But other than that, I really liked how they handled other background characters, such as Rhino, Scorpion, Electro, Vulture, Mr. Negative, and Doc Ock. They handled the Sinister Six very well in this game, which means that Superior Spider-Man could possibly have his own story in the next game alongside Venom and Green Goblin. Though then again, I have a feeling that Insomniac might just save Doc Ock for Spider-Man PS7, being that Superior Spider-Man stories are huge like Venom's stories. But that storyline is really worth exploring though. Just the curious little boy in me would love to know how the Doc Ock of this universe is able to survive without the use of his mechanical limbs. However, Spider-Man PS6 might just be focused on Venom and Green Goblin, which is great, because ever since the first game, I've been anticipating for Venom and Green Goblin to make their full appearance into the series, along with Peter Parker finally getting a hold of the symbiote as Venom's Spidey. So therefore, I'm actually okay with the idea of them setting aside Doc Ock for a separate game. But whatever Insomniac chooses to do with Doc Ock later on, I'm just hoping that they don't relegate the Superior Spider-Man storyline over to just being a suit DLC. Because not only would they be taking a massive shit dump on one of the most iconic stories of all time in Spider-Man history, but they would also be leaving out what really could be a satisfying conclusion to the character. You know, Doc Ock is not a one-dimensional bad guy. He's no Mysterio, he's no Green Goblin, he's no chameleon. He's a real person who's had a tragic upbringing and is real determined to turn it all around. So therefore, I think that Superior Spider-Man should get his own game in this series. Then again, Superior Spider-Man doesn't really have as many suits as Peter Parker and Miles Morales, so it's kind of hard to determine. But you know, they could always throw in Peter and Miles Morales and make it out to be more of a Spider-Verse type of game. I just think it would be really cool to see what the Spider-Man of this universe would be like under the perspective of a bad guy. I also think that the character designs along with the casting in Spider-Man PS4 are amazing. I'll never for the life of me understand why the studio thought that John Budeniak didn't match the voice acting of Yuri Lowenthal, but he was damn near perfect in the role. And of course, Yuri Lowenthal is already a terrific actor himself. I mean, this is the guy who's played as Ben 10 and many other legacy characters over the years. So from the moment this game was being released, I already knew that he was going to succeed as Peter Parker. A lot of people, including myself, love Mr. Budeniak as Peter Parker. He did such an outstanding job playing as Peter Parker on screen to the point where it became clear that a recast was completely unnecessary. But then the PS4 remastered happened, and I gotta say, I am not a fan of it. Like many others, I was pissed when I found out that they changed Peter Parker's face in this series. So much, I didn't even want to believe that this was a thing that actually happened. Like, I literally thought that this new Peter Parker was going to be something that we were going to be seeing in the Avengers game, being that there was talks about how Spider-Man would potentially make his appearance in that game, and that he would possess more of a Tom Holland / MCU-ish look. But no, turns out that this new Peter Parker is actually what we're going to be seeing in the Marvel games under Insomniac, which again, I am not a fan of. And I know Insomniac's thing is that they want to make as many updates as they can with each game going forward, but this was totally not the right way to handle it. Ben Jordan looks nothing like Yuri Lowenthal. Hell, he doesn't even look like Peter Parker. Because the good thing about John Budeniak was that his version of Peter Parker actually looked more practical. You know, actually looks like a real young adult, to the point of actually being more relatable, more serious, more impactful, and just overall a huge step away from what was shown in the MCU. I don't really get that same vibe from Ben Jordan, despite him having the same script as John Budeniak. Instead, all I see is just another Tom Holland on screen. I'm sorry, I'll trade all of the Tom Hollandses in the world for a good Spider-Man, and a Peter Parker who I could actually get behind and take seriously. Some people have predicted that this change might be permanent. I'm hoping that that's not the case. I'm hoping that Insomniac has Budeniak return to this role somehow. Cause this new Peter Parker, Ben Jordan, ain't vibing with me at all. But overall, I really like Spider-Man PS4 a lot. I will admit that it does have its issues, such as the battle damage suit. I wasn't a fan of the initial design. The remaster does kind of fix that by making the suit look a bit more practical, which is really great. But other than that, I've never really had a problem with any of the other stuff in Spider-Man PS4. The side character missions are a bit corny and ridiculous from time to time, but that's kind of what Spider-Man stories are in the comics, so why do we insist that it should be done differently in video games? I've played Spider-Man PS4 for hours and hours and hours, and never, not once, did I ever find myself groaning and bitching at the side character missions. Even the ones that involve Miss Mary Jane Watson, saying that this ruins the story, this ruins the game's quality, and other ridiculous shit like that. I will agree that that one side character mission of Spider-Man literally saving a kid who's dressed up exactly like him did feel a bit useless, but the side character missions plus the DLCs don't really ruin the story at all. And if anything, kind of helps build on it by making it feel more immersive. Seriously, if you haven't played Spider-Man PS4, I highly recommend checking it out if you're a Spider-Man fan, or if you're a comic book fan in general, or if you're just looking to play a really great game overall. Whatever the case may be, just know that this game is worth checking out. Honestly, I would recommend getting the original over the remaster, Just because I personally cannot stand the new Peter Parker, he just looks too much like Ben 10. But I mean, hey, if you like the new Peter Parker, then fine, go for the remaster. Don't think that I'm trying to guilt trip you, or make you feel bad for buying the remaster. I honestly do not have that kind of mindset. I honestly couldn't care less what game you choose to buy. Just like how I honestly couldn't care less what console you choose to buy. But that's a video for another day. Also, if you haven't played Spider-Man PS5, go try that as well, as I know it's an awesome spin-off and one of the best versions of Miles Morales right next to Spider-Verse. Anyways, that's a wrap for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. This is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for the longest. I made a video talking about this before, and it was really just a little mini rant I made about Insomniac not including the Venom Spidey suit into the game alongside with the other Spidey suits. It's a really terrible video. I just kept repeating the same points all over and over and over to the point where it wasn't really going anywhere, and so I ended up taking it down, and that's why you don't really see it. And also because this was during the early phases of my channel, back when I actually went by the name of Scott. For the longest, I never really had much to say about Spider-Man PS4 until now. So while everyone was already making videos and live streams about this very topic, I've been sitting on the sidelines taking notes and gathering up all of what I've experienced in regards to this game. And just know that I'm not a gaming analyst. I don't really talk about video games on this channel. But if there's a AAA game out there that's got my investment like Spider-Man PS4 and 5 do, then I will talk about it. Other than that, I'm really just some guy commenting on stuff other people talk about. So don't think that this is a full review of Spider-Man PS4. This is more of a discussion piece on both the game and the character overall. My god, this video was long. Anyways, I'm Hellblazer, everyone. Stay righteous, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.